Neriah waited until breakfast to tell the Avy about inviting Caddy to the cottage. Maybe he'll say no, she thought, trying to look as sick as possible, which wasn't hard. She felt horribly dragged out after last night. This made the sixth time she'd seen the smoke face. It was just as well. Caddy was going visiting with her papa, and that Neriah couldn't play with her today, for Neriah's eyes were full of sand, her brain bouncing against her skull like a rubber ball. But the Avy merely nodded and stirred his coffee slowly as he thought it over. If Caddy's to come tonight, he said, studying Neriah over the red and white oilcloth, you must promise to stay at home this morning and sleep. Sleep? Said Neriah. It's broad daylight. She glared at the Avy as though he'd ordered up that sturdy sun that glanced off the snow into the cottage. How do you expect an ordinary mortal like me to sleep while all these clocks are ticking? Oh, I wouldn't call you an ordinary mortal, said the Avy. But these nightmares of yours, they do worry me. And you're pale as a ghost. Neriah swung around to look at the copper pot. Her distorted face peered back at her, unsubstantial and wavery, as though she were filled with the mist instead of a solid bone and good red blood. Can we ever get a mirror? She asked. When I'm 16, I have to put up my hair. I'll come out all lumpy. We'll talk about it when you're 16, said the Avy, but it won't be worth looking into if you don't get some rest now. Neriah's fingers crept over the table toward the last night's leftover cake. Neriah's tired and needs some cake, poor orphan child. The Avy's hand darted out and pulled the plate toward him. He could move astonishingly quick when he wanted to. Hands off, he said, but he sounded sad instead of scolding. I suppose someday you'll learn you don't need to grab for everything anymore. But the mice will eat it, said Neriah. They just love that lemon hazelnut icing. The only mouse around here is you, Miss Grabby Bones. Neriah sighed and lay down, rolling her back along the bench. If she adjusted her eyes just right, she could make the ceiling look like the floor and pretend that she was walking on it. How funny to have a lamp sticking out of the floor. But when Caddy comes, she said, I don't want to sing, not with her here. Not sing, said the Avy, astonished. But we have to sing the giving song when we put out our gifts. I just don't want to, she said. Our songs are special, just between you and me, like the describing name. Neriah, singing isn't something people use up like a piece of cake. There's plenty of it to go around. You don't understand, she said, turning her head to look at him under the table, but he was standing up, the right angle of his knees disappearing as she watched. He couldn't see her, so she stuck out her tongue. She'd never make him understand. Understand what? She barely knew herself. Just that the Avy was the only one who'd ever loved her, and she didn't want to share that special thing she had with him, not even with Caddy. I'm going to the village to see if any of the other families has arrived, said the Avy. I'll ask Mr. Winter if Caddy can come for dinner. I'll tie a knot in my hair for luck, said Neriah, without enthusiasm. It seems to me you have enough knots in your hair already, said the Avy. And don't forget to milk Salty Lass. We'll need cream for our gifts for the Christ child. I never forget, yelled Neriah. The force of her voice made her fingers the force of her voice made her head vibrate on the bench. The Avy put his fingers to his ears. Neriah, you'll shatter the stove with that voice. You've already shattered me. Meet me at the common at sunset, and I expect to see you looking rested. Oh, and find me a description, if you please. Now here was something for Neriah to do, something solid and satisfying. She'd go skating and look for a description and leave even the memory of her midnight fathom behind. But first she'd curl up on the sitting room armchair and close her eyes just a few minutes. That way, if the Avy asked, she could truthfully say she rested. Neriah sat up 3 hours later. Plagues take it, she cried, borrowing a favorite expression of the Avy's. The whole morning was gone. Sleeping was such a waste of time. She stuffed a slice of bread in her coat pocket and sledded to the village. Her footsteps clicked down the awful quiet of Pier Road, the ghost houses looking even more desolate and shabby in the bright sun. A loose shutter banged in a little gust of wind. She heard half gasp then, and as though they were standing outside herself, heard the sound of her own foot pounding down the road and onto the pier. A description, she said, as she strapped on her skates. A description for the Avy. She eased into an ice She eased onto the ice and cast her words in front of her, threading to the air with her voice and tugging it taut with a bright invisible line. And the ice flowed her legs, and maybe it was just her legs flowed on the ice, and even when she took the air in a jump, there was some secret that whispered between the ice and her feet. She began with baby jumps, but grew confident by the end of the afternoon. Her feet, from habit now, had taken her near the old winter place. I wish the Avy could see me do this, she said. Leaping into the air, she landed on her backside and then bowed the angel statue watching from the shore. Please restrain your applause. A thin winter sunset unrolled behind the black lace treetops as she searched for the right describing words. Lavender gauze, she said finally. Lavender gauze mixed with a spoonful of light. She stood up and brushed the snow from her skirt. It was time to meet the Avy. Maybe she could beat him to the common. But the Avy was already waiting. Neriah sneaked up to behind him. Boo! She could at least pretend that she'd gotten there first. She never succeeded in taking him by surprise, and this time was no different. Look at that ice, will you? He said without turning around. It's spreading. Neriah followed the direction of the pointing finger. The ice was thicker than yesterday, beginning to spill outside the well in windblown courses that glistened in the lavender half-light. Agnes said the well is having a tantrum, she said, remembering Agnes's little smile. The Avy wheeled around in one of his surprising snake-quick moves. The well is not playing, Neriah. Didn't you promise me you'd stay away from it? I wasn't playing, said Neriah indignantly, because she hadn't broken her promise just by talking to Agnes. I had to ask Agnes something. Neriah Magdalena, said the Avy. It comes to the same thing. Neriah Magdalena to you, said Neriah furiously. Do you think I'd break my promise? I'm not going to tell you about my lavender gauze sunset. If you think that's not breaking your promise, said the Avy, then I release you from it altogether, since it clearly means nothing to you. You're just like Aunt Horton, said Neriah. Her lips were white with rage and injustice. Always disappointed in me. There was no truth to this. She knew it, but if the Avy could be unfair, so could she. Have a care for what you say, Miss Neriah, said the Avy. Your tongue will get you into trouble one of these days. They did not speak another word until Mr. Winter's carriage rumbled up into the square. Neriah didn't like the tender way the Avy unwrapped Caddy in a pile of blankets and packed her into the sled like a china ornament. The sight of Miss d'Estafier's floaty golden hair and huge blue eyes didn't give her the usual bell-ringing feeling inside, and she didn't even bother to brush accidentally on purpose against Miss d'Estafier's white fur cape. She stared up the mountain in silence, and Neriah could bear it no longer and tugged at the Avy's sleeve. And Avy said, "Oh, judge of sage advice, what is it now?" His voice was back to normal, all rumble and gravel. In fact, he might be trying not to laugh. Caddy wants to be Gerda in our play, but she was supposed to be Kai. You mean you decided I was supposed to be Kai, began Caddy, but Neriah interrupted. You see how it is, said Neriah. I told her you've already started the Gerda costume for me. What if you make Kai's part just as exciting, said the Avy. Then it might be easier to give up Gerda's part. Oh, Avy, said Neriah in a disgusted voice, but the Avy held up a finger. Hush. There's no moon, and the path gets tricky here. There's no moon, said Neriah, but this was just for the sake of the argument. For the moon was no more than a luminous silver curling above the shrugging shoulder of the earth. Hush, said the Avy, and steered himself past the difficult bit. And now, she said, let's hear about the lavender gauze sunset. Not now, Avy, Neriah hissed. Remember what I told you this morning about the songs and the describing game. Foolishness, said the Avy, but Neriah clapped her lips together and then ended as the climb began in silence. Neriah had already laid her treasures on the kitchen table for Caddy to see, her music box, her skates, and her doll. Beside them, the Avy had set out the gifts for the Christ child. There were almonds, tangerines, honey cream in a bowl, sugar and cone paper. Caddy sat in the sitting room armchair, which the Avy had dragged into the kitchen by the fire. That's a lot of ticking, said Caddy, squirming about and making the springs creak. Grumble, grumble yourself, said Neriah to the chair. And then Avy handed Caddy the cream and the sugar and the whisk. Tell me if you're sitting on the broken spring. Neriah, wrap the shawl around Caddy, will you? And Neriah, won't you take off your coat and stay a while? Neriah folded her arms across her chest Anne glared at him. That's what he was always saying when she came in. How dare he use his special "I want you to stay a while" in front of Caddy. Davy shrugged. Have it your way. You can have your own way about something else, too, said Caddy. You get to be Gerda and the Rebels. I won't be here because we're going back to Abbeyburg right after Christmas. Going back? Said Neriah, feeling a strange hand gripping her heart and wringing at its juices. Stuffy had won. Why didn't you tell me? She set the music box on the table and flipped it open. I tried to tell you giving up the mountain, said Caddy, but you interrupted. The mechanical soul of the music box could do no justice to the melancholy sweep of the song, but despite the tears beginning to rise through the hot springs behind Neriah's cheeks, she thought of the days and weeks and months ahead without Caddy and stared at the oilcloth as though the sight of it made the rebel unwanted tears. I wish I could skate again, said Caddy, reaching for Neriah's skates. Her thumb left a ghostly shadow on one silver blade. She stirred her finger in the air box, making the coins in the ring jingle together. Your mother's ring? She put it on her lips as though she were sucking some secret meaning from it, and then slipped it onto her finger. I don't have a ring from my mother. Neriah swallowed that lump of tears where she felt it melt in her heart, waiting to escape against some new grief. We have to get your papa to make that wish, she whispered. We just have to. Caddy shook her head. I know he never will. He's too afraid. This was the most unfair thing that had ever happened. Neriah could actually taste bitterness rising from her throat, and underneath there was a hot stream of resentment against the Abby. Does your papa like to play games? She said, grasping at straws. Would he play Padillo Palm and decide whether he'd do it? But even that, she thought, would be a bold move for pale, melancholy Mr. Winter. Padillo Palm? You use it to choose things, said Neriah. We would play Padillo Palm to see who gets the leftover cake. It has lemon hazelnut icing. No cake before dinner, said the Abby. You don't have to tell me, said Neriah impatiently, but we can play Padillo Palm for it now. She sat back on the bench, facing Caddy, and held out her fists. It was very warm there near the fire, for she still hadn't taken off her coat. I don't know if I like hazelnut, remarked Caddy, but she already followed Neriah's example of balling up her fists, and she held them out to Neriah. To the Abby drew a stool to the girls, and then there were three of them, three sets of fists in the circle, asking like begging dogs for a piece of cake. Ellen Glen, Fernway Fen, Abbeyburg. Neriah decided to forgive the Abby when he let her have the cake. She knew he would. That would be his way of apologizing, and she'd fling her arms around his neck and whisper that they would never leave each other. Locheldore, Blackheadge Moor, Cliffs, Berga, Padillo Palm, Padillo Palm, Padilla, Padilla, Padillo Palm. The Abby tapped Caddy's hand. Caddy won? Said Neriah slowly. She could not even look at the Abby. He had chosen Caddy over her, and only the brightness of her eyes betrayed her fury. I need to tell Caddy a secret, she said coldly to the Abby. Will you kindly step aside? The Abby raised his eyebrows. Since you asked so nicely. Neriah stared at him without blinking, and he turned away, and then she cupped her hands around Caddy's ear. I want you to stay and to be my very best friend, and I'll wish for some more legs for you. I'll do it, I will. And there, that would show the Abby. Caddy was sliding the garnet ring up and down her finger. Next to it she wore her own ring with the pink enamel rose. When will you do it? Tomorrow, said Neriah, but don't worry about pledging eternal gratitude or anything. Do you swear to do it? Said Caddy, pricking your finger and swear on blood. Neriah looked at her fingertip, closed up neatly without a single seam. You'll never get me to prick my finger. This all sounds really sinister, said the Abby, looking away from one girl to the other, only half smiling. Not sinister at all, said Neriah lightly to hide her fear that the Abby might be right. Caddy just smiled. There was an expression that Neriah had never heard, something about a cat with cream. She understood it now as she looked at Caddy, secret and veiled as a cat, but purring beneath at the prospect of cream. And suddenly Neriah felt very cold, although she was still sitting near the fire and she still had not taken off her coat.